I was blown away by your essay, Why Do They Hate Us, which was published in Foreign Affairs, or Foreign Policy, rather, sometime middle of last year. It's such a searing indictment of men. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit that I'm a man, but, of the culture of patriarchy, of the possibility of so much violence being targeted at women. Could you say a little bit about what inspired that essay? Why did you write it at the time that you did?
Well, first of all, it was the first essay that I wrote with all 10 fingers, because I was attacked in Cairo in November of 2011. An Egyptian riot police broke both my arms and sexually assaulted me, and I was detained for 12 hours. So I had both arms in a cast for 3 months, and I could only use one finger on a touchpad. And that was the first essay that I was able to type using all 10 fingers, as I usually do. So I actually wrote it in a lot of physical pain and also a lot of emotional pain because of what I'd gone through. Some people think that I wrote it just because of what I went through, but if anything, I also wrote it understanding that I was actually very lucky that I just went through what I went through. Because, I'm known, I have a media profile, I was able to tweet from the Ministry of the Interior that I had been beaten and arrested, and so there was a big campaign to release me. And so, I got to wondering, what if I didn't have any of those privileges, and I was just an ordinary, working class woman who was caught up in the revolution in Egypt, and I had gone through all of that, the attack and the detention, I might not even be alive today. So I think I wrote it also from an understanding that if they could do this to me, you could imagine how much worse it would be to women who don't have the privileges that I have. But I think fundamentally I wrote it because I spent the year before the essay came out wondering where the women's revolution was in the Middle East and North Africa, specifically in Egypt, my country of birth, because very soon after Hosni Mubarak was forced to step down, he stepped down on February the 11th. On March the 9th, the Egyptian military, because a junta was in place at the time, cleared Tahrir Square, and they detained all the men and women from Tahrir Square, so our revolutionaries basically, and they forced so-called virginity tests on the female revolutionaries. This was a process by which a military soldier tried to determine whether these women had a hymen in place or not, if they said they were not married. So I thought, my gosh, how could they do this to our female revolutionaries? These women are supposed to be heroes, and yet they were subjected to basically sexual assault, and nothing happened, nothing. I thought, there would be thousands of people in the street demonstrating and saying, how could you violate our heroes like this? Nothing happened. And I continued to hear of all these, continued violations against women in Egypt, and nothing was happening. So it became very clear to me that we had instigated a political revolution in Egypt that removed the Mubarak from the presidential palace up here, but we still had a Mubarak in our head, we still had a Mubarak in the bedroom, we still had a Mubarak on the street corner who was harassing women and sexually assaulting women. So the premise of my essay, and now a book that I'm writing, is that unless we remove this Mubarak from our mind, this revolution of the mind, and start a social and a sexual revolution that is towards gender equality, the political revolution that removed Mubarak and other dictators will fail.
In the essay you make mention that at 15 you came to some sort of realization, you came to feminism, to a kind of a traumatic experience. What else was in the mix that made you the kind of person that you are, or shaped the lens in which you view the world?
I think many things. I mean, I was born to an Egyptian family, and we moved to London when I was 7. And very early on in the UK, I realized that people had such little expectations of Muslim women. And the reason that we moved to London was so that both my parents, who met and fell in love in medical school, could get their PhD. And when my teachers, these educated women in the UK in the 1970s, in the heydays of feminism, when they would find out that my mother was doing a PhD in medicine, they were shocked. So at a very young age, I was picking up signals that people expect very little from Muslim women. But here I was being raised by a Muslim woman who, just like her husband, was getting a PhD in medicine. But then that all turned upside down when we moved to Saudi Arabia, because we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was 15. So that was very, very emotionally difficult for me to move there as a young Muslim girl from the UK to Saudi Arabia. It was a very suffocating environment. And here now I saw this, this Muslim woman, my mother, with a PhD, not being able to drive, being very, very curbed in what she could do in the outside world. And for myself as a girl, I couldn't do anything unless my brother chaperoned me everywhere. So I mentioned in the essay that as a female in Saudi Arabia, you have two options. You either lose your mind or you become a feminist. feminist. And so at first I began to lose my mind because it was such culture shock for me to see this happening in a Muslim country, because I didn't see this in Egypt. And, I learned that Saudi Arabia was a very, very exceptional Muslim country because it was so ultra-conservative. But unfortunately, that ultra-conservative message made its way to Egypt, has made its way to Malaysia, has made its way to so many other Muslim majority countries. And we really must fight that. And so I began to learn how to fight that, ironically enough, in Saudi Arabia, because at the age of 18, when I went to university, I found all these essays and textbooks, surprisingly, on the bookshelf, where I found the writings of Muslim women feminists from Egypt, from Morocco, and from other parts of the world who were challenging that very patriarchy that existed outside of my university.
Would this be people like Nawal al-Sadawi or Fatima Mernissi?
Exactly, Fatima Mernissi.
Mernissi.
Yes.
You talk about a toxic mix of religion and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Could you kind of unpack that a little? What does that mean?
Yeah. I think, for me, growing up as a Muslim, and especially as a Muslim who is also a feminist, people would often say, but it's nothing to do with Islam, it's all got to do with culture. But if we're really honest, we have to recognize that it's the two together. It's not just the culture. It's obviously the culture plays a role in that. The culture here in Malaysia is quite different than the culture in Egypt. And so the way that we interpret the religion can be different in the two countries. But there are things in the religion too that are often taken and used against women. So we have to be really honest. And one of the examples I like to use about, to illustrate that is Khadija. Who was the first person who accepted Prophet Muhammad's message? It was Khadija. But if you look at Khadija now and the kind of life that she lived and try to find her equivalent today, she would not exist. Khadija was a very rich businesswoman who was divorced, who employed Muhammad and who proposed to him, even though he was 15 years younger than her. So she proposed to him at the age when he was 25 and she was 40. And then we're taught that when he received the revelation and he thought he was going mad, she was the person who assured him that he was fine, and she accepted his message. And so she's the first Muslim, after Muhammad. And so, I look around and I wonder, is there a Khadija today? And there isn't. And so it makes me wonder what in our practice of our religion has eliminated Khadija from our life. And it's not just the culture, it's obviously what we've taken from the religion. And I think when you look at that ultra-conservatism in Saudi Arabia, but the other countries too, and what they've taken from Islam, they've basically taken all the things that are advantageous to men, and everything that had allowed Khadija to exist, they've eliminated. And so for me, again, to go back to this social and sexual revolution that we need, what I would love to see is the Daughters of Khadija Brigade. This is my revolution. I want to call it the Daughters of Khadija, and go out there and remind people that there was a time when there was a woman who was 15 years older than our Prophet, who employed him and who basically gave him the material and the emotional sustenance to launch this religion that we continue to practice till today.
You say towards the end of your essay that Muslims, perhaps Muslim women, must stop pretending, and they must resist the arguments that are based on a notion of cultural relativism. Mm-hmm. Maybe just to kind of wrap up, could you tell us what exactly do you think today someone like yourself or those who are sympathetic to the message you're bringing must think about more clearly?
I think we have to be very honest and call things as they are, and say that this is misogynistic. This is a hatred of women. A lot of people were very upset by the fact that I labelled all these things a hatred of women. But, what is it when you force an 11-year-old girl to get married and she dies in childbirth? That is hate. What is it when you mutilate the genitals of a 7-year-old girl? That is hate. What is it when you force a 16-year-old girl, as this young woman I mentioned in Morocco, to marry her rapist, and she drinks poison and kills herself because she can't take it anymore? All that is hate. So we have to call out that hatred, that misogyny, and say that this must stop. We also must stop pretending that this is a culture that we all abide by, because I'm very proud to be Egyptian and I'm very proud to be a Muslim, but I'm not proud of these aspects of the culture or the way that we practice the religion that allows for child marriage, that allows for genital mutilation, that allows for allowing a rapist to marry marry his victim and to escape unpunished. So once we begin to be really honest about those things and call them out for the hatred that they are, then we can begin to fight them. And one of the ways that cultural relativism is used against us is when our governments or our leaders tell the outside world to stop interfering because it's our culture. And the point that I make in the essay is that I had no say in this culture. None of the women I know said that we want this culture where they mutilate our genitals or they kill our girls through child marriage. So we have to acknowledge that this is a culture that was labeled as culture by men, and we have to say that we will not defend it just because it's our culture. But culture is a malleable thing that can change. It's not static. But unless we call out the hatred, it will remain static. So I think we need to challenge it both at home and abroad. And many of our countries are also signatories to international human rights conventions and conventions against the discrimination against women and conventions basically that protect children's rights. So we also have to call out that hatred by forcing our leaders to acknowledge that they're being hypocrites. They sign international conventions because they want to join, this prestigious international club, and yet at home they don't abide by any of the conventions because they all say, no, unless if it violates our culture and religion, we can't abide by it. Then don't sign it. You either have to belong to a culture that respects international human rights, or you say we're not part of that club. You can't have it both ways. And I think and calling out misogyny is a way to end that hypocrisy.
At the end of the essay, I just wanted to finish because I thought you signal some hope. There were individuals that demonstrated social courage in various ways, and that seems to be kind of central to the move forward that women, individuals like yourselves as writers, what should women first understand about the risk that they are taking when they step up to the plate and challenge these conventions?
I think without question there's a huge risk involved. I mean, each of the women that I mentioned at the end of my essay, even though they were very courageous, they paid a big price for it. One of them is a Saudi woman called Manal al-Sharif, who broke the ban on women's driving in her country, and the price that she paid was that she was jailed for 9 days. Another young woman is a woman called Samira Ibrahim, who's only 26, and she was one of the female revolutionaries who was subjected to a sexual assault that was described as a virginity test, and she was the only one who sued the military junta. And at the beginning they tried to ruin her name and they tried to put her and her family under pressure, and even though she lost that lawsuit, she's now acknowledged to have been a very courageous person to have gone forward and fought against that. So I think it's very important to recognize that there is a price that is paid, and this is where people such as myself and Manal and even Samira, even though she has less of the privileges that say someone like Manal and I have, it's important to recognize that those of us who have privilege must fight 10 times harder than those who don't. I'm educated, as I said, I have a media profile, people know who I am, so when I'm detained and when I'm attacked, there's a campaign that is launched to help release me. That obliges me to speak out and to fight harder, 10 times harder, than someone who's not educated, who doesn't have all these privileges that basically cushion them. So I think that it's important to recognize what position we have in our society, and the more comfortable it is, the more risk that we must take. And some of us, I don't have children out of choice. I'm not married. I lead a very independent lifestyle, and because I don't have children, those kind of things can't be used against me. And so if anything, that I feel more obliged to speak out and to really, really take it to the edge, much more than someone, say, whose family could use her children against her, someone whose family could, her husband could take away her children. All these horrible stories that we hear about women who take risks in the name of feminism. So I think, whether we're men or women in our respective cultures and societies, we must recognize that the more privileges that we have, the more we must fight, because there's rows and rows of men and women behind us who don't have the ability to speak out in the way that we do.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.